One is the loneliest number that you'll ever do. Two can be as bad as one. It's the loneliest number since the number one.
The Satanic Panic is one of the most interesting cases of what groupthink can do to people, and how easily people believe these baseless accusations. And it's all because of one man, Lawrence Panzer, and how this one man fooled millions of people around the globe that there were organised satanic rituals that were specifically targeting children. And all this panic from a now discredited book, Michelle Remembers, wherein which he uses this poor woman to prop up his conspiracy. He fooled her into thinking that she had been abused as a child, and that Satanists were to blame. And not only that, they were organised, working to destroy the moral character of the youth. To put in perspective, all this happened in the 80s, and it lasted all the way up to the early 2000s, up till Lawrence's death, and even then he never renounced his claims made in the book. I'll get into more detail into this in a minute. The book I'm speaking of is Michelle Remembers, a book that claims to prove that there are organised satanic groups abusing children. All the evidence was from a woman called Michelle who uncovered supposed memories with the help of Lawrence. In the book, it describes these supposed abuse that Michelle went through and the group responsible for it. Even from an outside perspective, this book, which to be clear, is simply a guy manipulating a poor woman thinking that if she was seriously abused by Satanists, there is no physical evidence, absolutely nothing. Like, I was going to go into the book itself and debunk the claim. However, there's so little there, I can't even do that. But despite that, countless people even till this day believe this. Even with that, these ridiculous accusations were ate up by the public. It spread like a wildfire across America, even into Europe. With the book gaining mass publicity from the blatantly false allegations, countless people were accused of being part of these satanic groups. It got so bad that real abuse cases were ignored since they were nowhere near as bad as what the supposedly Satanists were doing, actively undermining the abuse real children suffered. This all came to a head with the McMartin preschool trial, where a family-run preschool was accused of being a part of a satanic group. Despite the case and trial taking over a decade, nobody was charged, and it became the most expensive trial in American history at the time. Much of the so-called evidence brought up in the trial was eyewitness testimony from children. The prosecution used newly developed manipulation techniques from Key McFarlane, who used her position as a social worker as a point of experience. She used the dolls as props in the interrogations to ask leading questions on where they'd been touched by pointing on the doll. Then people like Lawrence would be frequently called on as a so-called expert in satanic ritual abuse, despite everything in the book he wrote being all in his imagination. As I said, his so-called expertise did no good in getting what he thought were Satanists abusing children jailed. This case in particular is one of hundreds, with each and every single one being similar to the events in Michelle Remembers, meaning that none of these accusations have any real basis in reality. They're simply copycats, basing their main story on the book Michelle Remembers. To be clear, Michelle, despite being manipulated, she still refuses to denounce the false claims made in the book, making her complicit in ruining these innocent people's lives and reputations. There were many other things caught up in the crossfire of the Satanic Panic. For example, Dungeons and Dragons was used as an example of things that were corrupting the youth and leading them to Satan, along with heavy metal bands that had references to Satan and other bits of the occult. Thankfully though, much of the panic died down with the Michelle Remembers book being discredited. It made the general public far more hesitant to believe that Satanists were invading their homes through subversive means. However, that hasn't stopped the general public from being any less superstitious, or less willing to believe outrageous things with very little, if any, evidence. Anyway, that's all from me. See you next week.